Hello, in just a moment we've got the press preview for you. I'll look at what's in the morning papers. First though, a reminder of our top stories here on Sky News. And President Trump has vowed to overturn a court ruling against his travel ban. Previous restricted travellers are now arriving in the US as their visas are reinstated. Demonstrators have marched through London calling for Mr Trump's planned state visit to the UK to be cancelled. And the father of the Egyptian man accused of trying to attack soldiers with a machete at the Louvre in Paris has insisted his son is not a terrorist. Hello, you're watching the press preview on Sky News. Joining me this evening to look at the morning's papers is the Times columnist Matthew Syed and the writer and columnist Christina Patterson. So very good evening to both of you. So let's take a look at what's on those front pages then. And the Sunday Times leads with an investigation into Britain's defences. It says the UK has gaping holes and there are concerns the armed forces would be unable to defend against a serious military attack. The Observer reports that the government is set to unveil a series of policies to support renters. A parliamentary inquiry is set to conclude that a government investigation into historic allegations of abuse in Iraq is unfit for purpose. That story, the lead in the Sunday Telegraph. Former Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, has called for the world to give Donald Trump a chance. That's in the Sunday Express. The Mail on Sunday reports that former UKIP leader Nigel Farage is sharing a £4 million bachelor pad with a French politician. Colleen Nolan, the Celebrity Big Brother winner, has credited the show with helping to save her marriage, and that's according to the Daily Star Sunday. So let's chat through those front pages and some of the stories inside with Matthew Syed and Christina Patterson. And we're going to kick off with Donald Trump, aren't we? It's on the front of the Observer, not their main story, it's down on the right-hand side there. And this is the reaction they're reporting of Donald Trump to the lifting of his travel ban on the orders of a judge in Seattle.
Well, Donald Trump is continuing to behave like a third world dictator, really. There have been a number of legal cases taken against this so-called Muslim ban, which I think very clearly was a Muslim ban. He said during his election campaign that he wanted to ban Muslims. He's now picked 99% Muslim countries to discriminate against. And by the way, not a single person from any of these countries has committed any act of terrorism in the US. So one could
just
argue
to say
about
that
the
he
logic
would
of
argue
it.
it's not a Muslim ban. He says it's not about religion, it's about keeping the country safe. And he says there are lots of other Muslim majority countries and that
yes,
aren't
he makes all
affected.
kinds of very strange arguments against. But since there hasn't been a single act of terrorism committed by a single person in America by any of those countries, it makes no sense whatsoever. Anyway, he went ahead and had this Muslim ban, and all kinds of judges in America were up in arms and have said it's unconstitutional and unlawful. And now a very influential, well, a judge with obviously the power of the law behind him, Washington-based judge James Robart, made a very clear declaration this morning that it was unlawful and unconstitutional, and so the Department of Home Security have now had to shut down the ban temporarily. So suddenly all these people who were told they couldn't go to the US, who have valid visas, are allowed to go in. And Trump, of course, is fulminating on Twitter and calling him a so-called judge and saying that it's ridiculous and will be overturned. He clearly does think he is above the law, and this is what third world despots and dictators do. And this is the man who was elected to be the leader of the free world. So we are in, well, as Ken Clarke said of Brexit this week, we are in Alice in Wonderland territory. This is really shocking.
Yes, and this could go as far as the Supreme Court, couldn't it? Donald Trump tweeting again this evening about it, clearly furious.
Well, this is why I think that the policy, and I want to make this clear, is indefensible, but I don't think Trump is behaving like a third world dictator. He campaigned on a platform where he would introduce a policy of this kind, so he is doing what he said he would do, which is unlike a lot of Democratic politicians. He has been challenged in the courts. If he had instructed the federal government to disobey the judge, then he'd be acting unconstitutionally. What he's actually doing, although rightly, as you say, using intemperate language, he's now appealing the decision in the courts. He's respecting the independent judiciary. Until he actually goes against what the judiciary is saying, then I don't think you can say he's behaving unconstitutionally or anything like a third world despot. I think that's an unfair allegation, although I agree the policy itself is indefensible.
Well, the judge has said he's acting unconstitutionally, so I'm agreeing with the judge. You're welcome to disagree with the judge, but I don't think... James Robart has said that he has acted unconstitutionally and unlawfully. And initially, earlier in the day, the statement from the White House was that this was outrageous. It is not outrageous for a judge to say that you have behaved unconstitutionally and unlawfully, because that is a judge's job. He is now saying it will go to the Supreme Court and we'll see what the Supreme Court says. But to call a judge a so-called judge, that is what a dictator or a despot does. He is not a so-called judge, he is a judge.
But just to rewind, the separation of powers, the founding father between the president and the Congress and between the federal government and the courts means that the president can sign an order but can be challenged in the courts,
yes,
and that the executive branch has to obey the decision of the courts, and if they want to appeal it to the Supreme Court. Trump is doing that.
Yes, but he can't vow to overturn it because it's not within his power. That's up to the Supreme Court. So he's making a promise he can't keep.
Well, I think what he would say to that is that he feels confident that the Supreme Court will back his judgment that his order is constitutional. Remember, it's been tested in other lower courts and they have backed the president. It's this one particular judge who hasn't. I agree there's a lot of disagreement within the judiciary. That's precisely why the Supreme Court is likely to intervene and take it straight up to the highest court in the land. A third world dictator doesn't have an independent judiciary. They would have a judiciary that would be kowtowing to the views of the executive. That's not what's happening in America. There is a vigorous judiciary. It's precisely because of that that Trump has been overturned in the lower court. So I think it's, I agree with you, the policy is a bad policy. He campaigned on it, which I'm sure you would agree is factually correct. But it's a bit much to say that he's acting like a third world despot at this point.
I mean, he may
get to that point.
We're going to stay with Trump, but I want to move on to the next paper, the Sunday Express. This is the former Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, calling for the world to give Donald Trump a chance, he says. And of course, that we've seen protests, haven't we? In Britain today, we've seen protests in America as well, and a lot of people very angry about Donald Trump. Are you prepared to give him a chance, Christina?
Well, I mean, he's the President of the United States. I mean, alas, it's not within my power to give him a chance or not to give him a chance. Do I think he's acting wisely? No, I don't. There's been this flurry of executive orders in the last 10 days, and an enormous number of them were deemed instantly questioned in the courts all over the country, and also by people ranging from Angela Merkel to François Hollande to any number of politicians you could name. I personally think that Donald Trump is behaving like a third world despot, and I think that what he is doing is against American values. It's arguably against the American Constitution, and I don't think... What the argument that George Carey is making is plenty of people, like, North Korean dictators behave badly. He is not the leader of North Korea. He is the leader of the free world. So I think there comes a point where you have to say, actually, this is not good enough. Of course, you have to engage up to a point. I'm not suggesting you cut off all links, and I have huge sympathy for Theresa May and all other leaders, because I think they're in a very, very difficult position. But I do think it's not hysterical to say that to have a policy that is very, very clearly racist is a bad thing.
Because he uses that word, doesn't he? He accuses Trump's critics of a hysterical overreaction.
Yeah, I'm not keen on Donald Trump, but I think there are two ways tactically to deal with the fact that he is now the democratically elected president of the most powerful country in the world and our biggest and most important ally. One is to develop a strong relationship, and having secured that, to criticise him privately and sometimes publicly in furtherance of British interests. The other is to lead a protest against him by going out on the streets, as Jeremy Corbyn has done, or at least posted a video, alienating the president and making it less likely he will listen. I don't think that it's hypocritical to take the first route as a tactical means to try and get the best outcome for this country and our values. It's just a difference of tactics, not of our values. It's a different way of approaching a difficult strategic problem.
OK, I'm going to move you on to another story, because we've not got long to the break, and let's try and squeeze in.
We're going to start fighting on the couch for the first time ever.
We normally agree. But by the way, people people who swear a lot have a rich vocabulary, and I'm getting quite near that point.
Oh dear,
Don't
oh
do
dear.
it.
Thank
Not
goodness
on
we're going to a break.
I won't.
Okay, Sunday Times. Are you going to agree over this one? This is an investigation by the Sunday Times that they suggest has found gaps in Britain's defences, they say.
We didn't actually pick this story.
Yeah, it was actually the Sunday Telegraph.
Yeah.
Apologies.
No,
You're
don't worry.
absolutely right. That's completely my fault. There we go.
But this is
Sunday Times later, no doubt.
Yeah, but at the 11th. But this. I was really angered by this lawyer who portrays himself as a great defender of human rights and has gone after British servicemen with allegations of abusing and murdering Iraqis. And it turns out that he has been deceitful, he has touted for business, he's been paid public money in hundreds of thousands, and it turns out that he's a complete crook and he's been struck off. But this story goes slightly deeper, and it is saying that the Iraq Historic Allegations team that was set up by the government in 2010 is not fit for purpose. This was the organisation that was working with China to try and verify whether the allegations were true. And it's saying that it should be replaced, root and branch, by a different organisation with a different remit. I don't think it's saying, and I would agree, British soldiers should be within the purview of the due process of law. But it just seems to me they have been targeted outrageously, having put their lives on the line for this country.
I'm afraid I completely agree.
In that case, we will take a break while we try and stir you up again to disagree. Lots to come after that break, including how Laurel and Hardy cheered up the Queen over Christmas. That's coming up. You join us as we take a look at the morning papers with Times columnist Matthew Syed and the writer and columnist Christina Patterson. And we're going to turn our attention to domestic politics. And you've picked out a story in the Mail on Sunday which is suggesting that Jeremy Corbyn's under more pressure. And they're quoting Harriet Harman, or suggesting that that she's been backing Keir Starmer. Where's that come from?
There's a tape that's been found of her singing Sir Keir Starmer's praises. And I have to say, he has been fairly adept in a very difficult situation. I don't agree. It's an impossible. Labour are in an impossible situation because most Labour voters voted for Brexit. Most Labour MPs voted for Remain. Corbyn and people like Diane Abbott, who, funnily enough, was extremely ill this week. She's my local MP, and tragically, even though she was tweeting merrily just before the vote, suddenly was so ill she couldn't possibly vote. So she abstained by her absence. But Keir Starmer is a grown-up. He's sensible. He's a lawyer. It has been said he does lack a bit of charisma, but charisma isn't necessarily the most important thing. And I have to say, he is leagues ahead of most of the front bench of Labour at the moment. So, in my view, if he were to take over from Corbyn, then that would be, a lot better than what we have at the moment.
I think Labour is in the worst position in my lifetime, and much worse than 1983 under Michael Foot, far too far to the left. Corbyn, who I rather admire on a personal level as a principled man, I think is completely unelectable. And even when he makes the right kind of decision, in my view, imposing a 3-line whip on the triggering of Article 50, because he is a serial rebel himself, defying the whip over something like 500 times over the course of his parliamentary career, he has absolutely no moral authority to unite the party, even on pragmatic grounds. So it couldn't be worse. I agree with you. Keir Starmer has been reasonably impressive in what is a difficult situation for Labour. I think they should admit that they're split on it, just like the country.
But he has said that.
Exactly. But the fact that there's more pressure on Corbyn, I think it's unlikely that he will resign before the next general election. I think it will require another heavy defeat for the Labour grassroots to swing back into the line as they did after 1992. That was, what, 4th successive defeat in 92 when Blair came in.
And we, of course, can't vouch for the credibility of this leaked tape. We haven't seen it and don't know about it. But it does appear that Jeremy Corbyn is under pressure over Brexit. And on another page in the Mail on Sunday, they suggest that Theresa May is also under pressure within her own party over Brexit.
Well, she has, in her speech the other day, when she finally said what she was aiming at, which was basically very little, her kind of essential threat to the EU is, if you don't give us a lovely deal, we'll just leave anyway, and we'll essentially crash out of any trade deals and go back to World Trade Organization. terms, which I think most people think would be absolutely disastrous for the British economy. So various MPs, including Ken Clarke, who gave a magnificent speech this week, saying that he thought it would be like the Iraq War for Theresa May, that all these people who said they thought the Iraq War would be a great idea, and then a few years later you couldn't find anyone who'd voted for it and they all thought it was a disaster. He thinks Brexit is going to be like that. I hope he's wrong. I think he may well be right. But people like him and Anna Soubry and Dominic Grieve and Nicky Morgan are among the people who have threatened to say, look, if the deal is that we just crash out, we're not going to vote to support that. And then Theresa May could be in trouble.
I mean, if I've understood the argument that's being put forward, that the alternative to a bad deal should be our remaining in the EU and Parliament should have a vote on that, I think there's a very serious strategic problem, namely that the European Union has a massive incentive to give us the worst possible deal so that we decide we want to remain within the EU. So I just don't see this as a credible way to ensure we get the deal that would reflect the views of the British people during the Brexit campaign.
I think we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't on this one. I don't think the EU has any great incentives to give us a good deal anyway. I think we've already declared that we're very happy to go for a hard Brexit. We're going to leave the single market. It's in their interests to give us a not very good deal because otherwise other people will vote to leave. And so I think on balance, Theresa May has put immigration above economic considerations, and we don't have many cards to play at this point. But I do think that if we do crash out without a deal, I think the likelihood is that's going to work out pretty badly for us.
I feel like talking about the Queen and Laurel and Hardy. Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Luckily, it's in the papers. It's in the Sunday Express. Tell us why.
Well, she, when she was unwell, we're told that she was cheered by watching comedies, particularly Laurel and Hardy. And I have to say, I'm massively into black and white comedies. They had on TV today School for Scoundrels.
Oh, yes.
Isn't that brilliant? Terry Thomas,
wonderful.
Ian Carmichael, these Bolton Brothers films. Laurel and Hardy is just genius. And it just shows, to me anyway, that you can have wonderful, brilliant comedy, funny, without cursing and swearing or doing anything blue. And the Queen looks very happy, doesn't she, on that photo?
We don't know she was actually watching Laurel and Hardy at the point, but it's nice to see her smiling.
It is. And very quickly, we can just squeeze in one more story about chocolate bars. They're going to get smaller.
Yes. We're all eating...
This is not to do with Brexit, though, is it? We can't blame Brexit.
I'm sure it's the Brexiteers' fault. No, it's because sugar is a very, very big problem in health terms, and all the recommendations are that people should eat less of it, and therefore the brands such as Kit Kat, Mars Bar and Dairy Milk have decided that a good way of cutting their sugar would be to shrink the size of chocolate bars. I feel that the consumer might be a bit hard done by on that, and it will be interesting to see whether they cut prices to reflect the size of the new bars. Personally, I like
just buy two of them instead.
That's what I was thinking.
Exactly.
We're out of time, but 11:30, we'll see you again. Thank you both very much indeed.